Welcome to the Innovation Brief, the podcast where we have real conversations with leaders driving meaningful change across diverse sectors. I'm Gabby Hernandez. Each episode, we bring you insights from innovators who are shaping the future through bold ideas, fresh perspectives, and transformative work. Today, we're joined by someone whose career sits at the intersection of science, design, systems thinking, and ecology. Our guest is Léonie Weerakoon, a human ecologist, designer, artist, conservationist, investor, and serial entrepreneur. Léonie is the managing director of Kinetik, a firm driving innovation in the bioeconomy while protecting some of the planet's most biodiverse ecosystems. She was a founding team member at Formula One Austin and Whole Foods eStore, has advised governments and global organizations, and spent much of her career investing in and scaling companies across multiple industries, helping create over $31 billion in economic value with a focus on new markets. Her work today bridges indigenous resilience, island innovation, biomimicry, and climate solutions, bringing systems-level thinking to how we design regenerative futures. She's currently a visiting researcher at the University of Tokyo and plays an active role advising the nation of Hawaii, the Global Island Partnership, and the European Innovation Council. Whether you're an entrepreneur, policymaker, investor, or simply curious about how we might build economies that work with nature rather than against it, this conversation will challenge the way you think about innovation. So let's dive in. So welcome, Léonie. We're glad to have you.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you, Gabby.
Well, just to start off, could you please introduce yourself and share a little about your journey, such as how you came to work in this space?
That could probably be its own episode entirely. But to sum it up, I would say probably the most important aspects of how I came to this space is really my upbringing. I grew up across three cultures, Luxembourgish American and Sri Lankan, which really shaped how I see the world. From Sri Lanka, I inherited a respect for longstanding knowledge, whether it's indigenous knowledge systems, but also a deep sense of how we as humans interact with our environments. And my family they had a legacy of public service, which gave me an early understanding and awareness of how human decisions impact us both on a societal and even in natural ways. And I basically started my career in luxury design when I was really young. I was a teenager, but also over time then realized that as much as I loved creating and designing, my true path, at least within my career, was really in innovation, scaling, and building new markets. And while keeping conservation, design, and human ecology close, since those were actually also parts of my academic personal background, I grew up working globally. And that gave me insight into how the world approaches sustainability, economics, culture. And then, over time, I ultimately just built the ability to connect across different languages, really through like science, innovation, economics, culture, policy. And that fluency in these systems allowed me to spot gaps and build solutions that most traditional solutions often overlook. So, yeah.
I can totally resonate with that, particularly as an islander myself and a third culture kid. And it's really great to see someone doing the work that you're doing in this space, particularly through Kinetik. One way that you've described Kinetik is as treating nature not as a resource to extract, but as a collaborator. Can you expand on what that looks like in practice? How do you partner with nature in the innovation process?
Yeah. So, there are a couple of ways that I can really look at this really as a human on my spiritual and deeper connection that I have with nature, or wearing the more scientific hat as a human ecologist. So I'll start with, as a human ecologist, one of the things that we do is we look at how humans are part of ecosystems and not outside of them. Right. And so at Kinetik, which is heavily influenced by my academic background as a human ecologist, but also with my personal connection that I've had with nature across the world, what that means is it translates to you're not just seeing nature as raw material for an industry, but really looking at how do we treat it as a partner that has already spent billions of years running R&D, right? And knowing that ecosystems are some of the most efficient and resilient systems that exist around us. So in practice, that could show up in a few ways. So first, in how we design ventures, we look at biocritical regions, which are basically places rich in biodiversity and culture. And then we ask, what knowledge or patterns or assets exist here that could inspire new markets and align with regeneration instead of extraction. And so, for example, that could be, biomimicry that has led to material innovations. But, we're pushing further because often these are very modern, dominant language that is not very inclusive to those who have a deeper connection with nature. And so, we're using ecological processes and indigenous knowledge to identify opportunities in food systems, energy, cultural economies. And then I would say the other way is really about how we measure value, right? Instead of just asking, what can we extract and take out? We ask, what does the system need to thrive? And how can we invest in ways that strengthen it? So that creates ventures that are economically viable, but also strengthen ecological and cultural resilience. So I guess that was a long way to answer. What does partnering with nature mean? It's not just metaphorical, but it's really about bringing the logics of ecosystems into market design and then building companies that succeed because ecosystems succeed, right? For billions of years.
And we're going to get back into a lot of, more the kind of cultural side and ecological side in a little bit. But as you kind of touched on, you've had quite a broad range of experience. You've worked in organizations such as Formula One, Whole Foods, United Nations policy rooms, and now deep work in biodiversity and venture. What connects those experiences and what have they taught you about how innovation really scales?
To the outside, in a very linear world, it looks very much across so many different areas. But for me, it was always about building new markets, right? That's the common thread, and shifting human behavior. So because markets scale when people's choices and mindsets shift alongside them. And whether it was launching F1 in the US or helping Whole Foods, or advising governments, and now working on biodiversity, the common thread is really in identifying untapped potential and then figuring out how to scale it responsibly when no one else believes it will or can. So, we're really playing in areas that are truly innovative. And really, many of the companies that I worked with were doing the first of its kind. We're the first innovator in its space, in its sector. And a lot of, there was very little support, often for a decade or, less. So what I've learned is that innovation doesn't scale just because you have a good idea. It really scales when you can connect it to systems, right? Whether it's in policy, culture, capital, communities. And example, at Formula One, it was about creating cultural legitimacy for something that was very new. At Whole Foods, about marrying values with technology. And in policy rooms, for me, it's about bridging gaps and connecting the dots to perspectives that are often overlooked or not yet visible. And biodiversity, it's about reframing conservation as an engine for innovation and growth that drives the markets of our future. And so the through line for me is scaling innovation really means, building bridges between disciplines, between sectors, and between what's valuable locally and resonates globally. So globalization, that's actually a word, another term that I learned.
You just kind of touched on it, some of like the idea of those new opportunities, but also in that there's some, blind spots within innovation, and, oftentimes in spaces such as regeneration, which is obviously a very popular term now. But, you've kind of talked about some of those blind spots, often, particularly in the absence of cultural insights and systems awareness. Could you give an example about what that blind spot kind of looks like and how you approach closing it?
So I would say one of the common blind spots, and that's really central to Kinetik and to our focus, is in innovation and around regeneration is basically assuming that solutions can be scaled universally without understanding local culture, knowledge systems, or ecological context. And as an example, a tech-driven conservation solution might look really impressive on paper, but if it ignores how communities have managed and interacted with their land for generations, adoption will fail, or worse, it creates unintended harm. And we've seen this and continue to see it happen globally. And so at Kinetik, we approach this by first mapping the systems, ecological, cultural, and economic. And then we bring together local knowledge holders or scientists and market innovators to then co-create solutions. And so in this way, the innovation is really grounded in reality and aligns with a local context with pathways to scale globally. And so essentially closing that blind spot means really connecting perspectives that are often siloed through cultural insight, ecological data, and market strategy, but then also designing interventions that speak to all three simultaneously. And a big part of that is not just taking knowledge, but it's really being collaborative in that sense.
With Kinetik, a lot of your current work actually focuses on, these culturally rich regions, biocritical regions, and island ecosystems. What is it about these regions that makes them so vital to innovation, resilience, and tackling issues such as climate change?
Yeah. So I mean, there are like thousands of islands and so many different regions that exist that are critical in some way, shape, or form. But islands are super unique. One, I'm Sri Lankan, and so initially that was really part of the branding, right? But also they're really unique because they concentrate both vulnerability and opportunity. And their ecosystems are often highly biodiverse, but also fragile. And so their communities are deeply connected to the environment for survival, right? And that's a common narrative that is thrown around about islands, especially SIDS, small island developing states, right? And that combination creates a natural laboratory for innovation, where solutions are developed in island context, whether that's for resilience, sustainable economies, or even climate adaptation. And so these can then be scaled and adapted globally. And that's part of what we do in our research. So at Kinetik, we focus on these biocritical regions. We've identified specific hotspots that are really catalysts for the advancement of scaling nature-based solutions or really advancing the bioeconomy. And so once we've identified these regions, then we look at early indicators of ecological and social pressures. And because working with island communities teaches lessons about efficiency and also adaptation, we're then creating new markets in ways that are tightly aligned with cultural and ecological realities. That's why islands.
You've touched on it a bit earlier in terms of like the importance of indigenous and local knowledge systems. How do you see indigenous governance and cultural wisdom informing the future of global innovation?
Yeah. Oh gosh. I mean, I feel that there's so much to say about that. But I would say indigenous and local knowledge systems offer perspectives honed for over centuries on how humans interact with their environments. And like one of the biggest misconceptions that I often find troubling is that everyone has this perception of what it means to be indigenous. That okay, you're living off the grid, you look a certain way, you're wearing a certain garment, but that is not the case at all. Especially with in this century, many indigenous have PhDs. They're business owners, but they still have this deep tie and relationship to their natural ecosystems. And I mean, within their communities or, where their homes and their land through their own lineage. And so they provide insights into resilience and resource management and long-term thinking that modern innovators often overlook and modern innovation. And so, yeah, at Kinetik, we see these knowledge systems not as just static traditions, but really as living frameworks that can ultimately inform how we design technologies, economies, and policies in ways that are regenerative rather than extractive. And there truly is so much to be learned, and there isn't enough exploration that has gone on about this. And that's why a lot of the work we do is quite original in terms of integrating cultural wisdom with scientific and economic tools. And this allows us to then create solutions that are both innovative and rooted in real world ecological and social contexts.
From your advisory role within the nation of Hawaii to collaborating with organizations like GLISPA and the European Innovation Council, you're operating at multiple scales, local, regional, and international. How do you balance these different arenas and what insights transfer across them?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, working across local, regional, and international scales is really about connecting perspectives that often don't meet, right? So, at the local level, it's about understanding culture, ecosystems, and community priorities. And surprisingly, often these perspectives are left sort of locally, even within their own communities and regions. They often, there's a disconnect in how they are able to share their perspectives within their own community. And then regionally, you start to see patterns and systemic challenges that really exist across borders. And then internationally, it's about creating frameworks and opportunities that allow these local insights to influence larger policies, markets, and then, ultimately investment decisions. So I'd say the key insights that transfer across all scales is that context matters, and solutions need to be locally informed, culturally sensitive, and then ecologically grounded, even as they scale to global impact.
As a female leader, with a diverse background and an investor and advisor, what has your experience been like navigating the global venture and innovation ecosystem? And have you noticed any shifts in how capital and influence are being allocated?
I mean, well, there's so much that I've learned. But navigating the global venture and innovation ecosystem as a female leader has definitely been challenging, but also very eye-opening and educational in many senses, as well as instructive. So early on, I would say, I've encountered many blind spots, not in necessarily people's intentions, but really in who gets visibility, credibility, and then even access to networks. And so over time, I've seen shifts. There's, growing recognition that diverse perspectives drive better decisions and uncover new markets, particularly in areas like sustainability and the bioeconomy, but it's definitely still uneven, and capital and influence are still concentrated. So part of my work is really helping bridge these gaps and connect underrepresented innovators to opportunities and really demonstrate the real value of inclusive thinking and scaling ventures. I just look at this as such a huge disconnect and missed opportunity. And I believe that, part of that is having this global visibility. And often, even the biggest decision makers in policy or, capital allocators don't necessarily have that global understanding. So there is still a big disconnect there.
Your portfolio touches everything from biomimicry to blockchain to circular fashion. Where do you see the most exciting breakthroughs coming from right now in building a nature centric economy?
I would say the most exciting breakthroughs for me are happening where technology, biology, and human systems sort of intersect. I mean, I think I may have mentioned biomimicry earlier. It teaches us to design processes that are efficient, regenerative, and scalable, but also at the same time, digital innovations, like, I don't know, people might have their own opinions about this, but like blockchain, I've been working and following this space for a long time now. And, these can create transparency and traceability for ecosystems and supply chains, turning conservation into measurable economic value that are really relevant to a lot of these regions, especially SIDS. And so, in the context of like circular fashion and bio-based materials, that shows, well, what we're seeing are, legacy industries can be reimagined to reduce biodiversity loss while opening entirely new markets. I think I see it almost as there's this huge fear of loss and change around these industries that are so harmful, such as these legacy industries like the fashion industry. But it doesn't mean that they don't have to exist. It just means that they're sort of pivoting, and we really need to shift our perspective in regards to new materials. And so the common thread is that the innovations that will shape a nature-centric economy are really those that integrate ecology, culture, and then economics from the beginning, rather than treating the environment as an afterthought, which is technically the space that we're living in.
100%. And it's very interesting because, you're an investor and you've contributed to creating enormous economic value through your work, but you have this emphasis on regeneration over extraction, which, as you said, is kind of the status quo, how we've been doing business for a very long time. So how do you evaluate success differently as an investor and innovator in this space?
Yeah, that is a big challenge, right? Because I do play in the realm of like traditional metrics, but then also have this other side of me that I'm trying to bridge and show, well, there's so much value that you're just not seeing in these linear frameworks. I would say traditional metrics, they often focus, the way I just would describe them, are, short-term financial returns and very linear in thought, because there is this lack of understanding of global awareness and even global footprint. But in regenerative innovation, success looks very different. And it's about the long-term resilience of ecosystems and the vitality of communities, right? The stewards, those who will continue these ecosystems, and then also the creation of markets that wouldn't exist without investing in regeneration first. So I'd say that we evaluate initiatives not just on revenue or growth, but recognize these as important metrics because we live in a society that is deeply addicted to this concept. But then on their ability to generate positive ecological, cultural, and economic feedback loops. So, where do we protect biodiversity and then also empower local knowledge systems directly? These opportunities also drive sustainable value. And so that's where the research side of Kinetik comes in, right? We're really trying to expand upon this and show that there is value beyond the traditional metrics, the value of cultural, ecological knowledge preservation, or indigenous knowledge preservation, and value in natural assets that also add to the bottom line in ways that haven't really been explored.
I know you've been recently doing some research with the University of Tokyo, and you're also organizing a summit during New York Climate Action Week. Can you share what that work is uncovering and what people can expect?
So definitely, that was very exciting. I just got back from Japan, and but with the University of Tokyo, a guest researcher, to really expand upon this research of how can we catalyze the bioeconomy while looking at social ecological factors of culture and nature as an economic asset. So there was quite a lot of deep diving to do, but basically, I would say that research sort of sums up how cultural and ecological systems intersect with innovation, and then looking at where knowledge gaps exist and how we can create scalable solutions. So like NBS, nature-based solutions that are both regenerative and economically viable, right? So I was really looking at translating knowledge into commercially scalable products and localizing knowledge to become global that is helpful in reducing and mitigating biodiversity threats and loss for these legacy industries. And then with the summit, so yeah, the upcoming summit is September 24th here in New York during Climate Week. We're also very excited about. But we're bringing together leaders from science, policy, and industry to highlight these insights, right, and showcase emerging solutions and create concrete pathways for collaboration. So, like last year, it was on Islands Shaping the Future of Innovation and Science, where we had 34 countries. 24 of them were islands and 14 island nations that came together, and we're talking about their strengths of how they're actually really at the forefront of regeneration and moving the bioeconomy forward, which is not something that you often hear, right? We're often talking about the vulnerabilities of these communities, and which there are many vulnerabilities, but there are also so many strengths that we can draw from to assist humanity globally. So it'll be similar. It's the Future of Living Systems is our summit this year, and attendees can expect a mix of thought leadership, actionable strategies. We're having a workshop hosted by BPA, Blue Planet Alliance, and then opportunities to also see how innovation can work hand in hand with both nature and culture. So is nature and culture, are they economic assets? And if so, how so?
It's super exciting and really looking forward to hearing how the event goes and seeing the outcomes of your research. Looking ahead, what's a big maybe prediction, or if not a prediction, a trend that you see shaping the future of innovation, particularly when it comes to, this mixture between ecology and culture?
Yeah, one of the biggest shifts I see is the move from siloed innovation to systems-based. I hear a lot of people talking about systems and being systems thinker. I think there's still lack of awareness and experience in like real economic systems level change. Yeah, so I mean, within nature-centric innovation, I mean, the future of growth doesn't come from simply creating new products, right? But it's really about understanding and integrating ecological and cultural systems into how we design, as mentioned, before, markets and then technologies and our policies. If you're someone who can bridge the gap between human needs and natural systems, wisdom, whether it's cultural wisdom or ecological wisdom, that will help unlock entirely new opportunities, whether in climate solutions, regenerative ag, or global markets. So that value, that ultimately, the value of biodiversity is just as much as a financial return.
Amazing. Léonie, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today and for joining us.
And thank you. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to just be a voice for nature and our sacred treasures, and have a voice here on your platform, the Innovation Brief. So really grateful for this opportunity. Thank you, Gabby.
Yeah, really grateful to have had this conversation. So, what's next for you and the Kinetik team? And maybe can you share a little bit about how listeners can connect with you, learn more about, and support your work?
Yeah. Well, I think definitely connecting with more like-minded researchers and professionals like you, like how we were connected, right? And contributing, collaborating on reports, I think is definitely one way. For Kinetik itself, I mean, the next phase is really all about scaling. It's about moving the research, moving the work, identifying new investments, and just bringing more community members and connecting biocritical regions like islands with global markets in ways that are regenerative and culturally informed, right? Authenticity is key here. It's not about globalizing a dominant perspective from the Western world, because those are not necessarily the individuals or perspectives that are deeply connected to nature, right? To the resources that we have a finite amount of. So yeah, we're just continuing to develop ventures and research and through advisory projects that bridge gaps between science, culture, and economics, and then also, really focused on the venture side and the investment vehicle. So I would say for anyone listening, they can follow our projects or get involved by visiting our website, which is www.kinetikvc.com. That's Kinetik VC.com. Join our summit in September. So it's also listed there, the future or futureoflivingsystems.org. Yeah, just the usual, follow on social. And yeah, every connection, helps us amplify impact and bring more voices. I'm deeply grateful for all the support that we've received so far and that we continue to receive. So yeah, we just want to be able to expand the research and bring more people on board. And
Amazing. Thank you so much. And definitely look forward to supporting and collaborating with you and the Kinetik team. Thank you again, Léonie, for joining us and sharing your perspectives, especially on how innovation can become more regenerative, more conscious, and more deeply connected to nature.
Thank you. And everyone, go check out the islandsproject.org, which is Gabby's latest, or actually your first report, right, on islands. And maybe next time you'll be in the seat and we'll be able to interview you. So it's been wonderful dropping in, and thank you again for this opportunity. Bye, everyone.
Thanks for the plug. But we'll definitely put the links to your website, the summit, as well as your profile in the description. So everyone, please connect with Léonie to continue the conversation. And that's a wrap on this episode of the Innovation Brief. If you've enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe to the Innovation Brief and leave us a review. It helps other innovation leaders and curious minds discover the show. We'll be back next time with another inspiring conversation. This has been the Innovation Brief. I'm Gabby Hernandez. Thanks for listening.